Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. I am Andrew, aka Neo Mindgasms, and of course, I'm talking about the Matrix Resurrections today. Whether it's as good as the original trilogy, along with a lot of the themes in it, like deconstructing binaries, you create your own reality. Everything is a revolving and repeating story, and yeah, as I said, compare the movie to the original trilogy and talk about what themes are repeated, what themes seem to be new or at least executed in a different way, and I'll get into all my thoughts about it. So, yeah, obviously, this is apparent in the movie. Neo still knows kung fu, as you can see, and Trinity is there, and there's the architect, of course. And just be forewarned, of course, this is I'm gonna get into full spoilers for this because I have a lot to say about it. So obviously, Neo, he still has beard and he has beard and long hair, like John Wick style. Of course, I knew they were gonna find out some they were going to create some manufactured story reason for him to have that look, of course. And of course, we have Trinity, and in this version, Neo is he's he's designed a video game called The Matrix, and she is married to another guy and has kids with him, and Neil Patrick Harris is Neo's therapist or psychiatrist because he had some sort of mental breakdown and thought that the video game The Matrix that he created actually was the real world, and he created it because he had been deceiving himself. And so it gets well, I'll get more into that, but I just want to say before I get into criticisms of the movie specifically, just in terms of the way that it looks, it it does have some cool action parts, but it doesn't have, like, for example, it doesn't have all of the iconic shots that it has in the first three films, but it mimics some of them. Like there's this moment here, of course, where Neo is stopping bullets with his mind, basically just by putting his hands up like that, and Trinity is with him when at that time when that happens. So like I said, there are moments that there are iconic shots that copy what happens in the original trilogy, and then but and none of it looks as cool as the shots in the original movie though. But the like of course it seems obvious that a lot of what they were going for with this was nostalgia. Like as I said before, of course Neo still knows kung fu, so this gets into an interesting aspect of the character and the story, I think, because they explain later on in a later scene that Neo, uh, well, basically, it gets revealed that Neo and Trinity are still their original selves from the original Matrix that was destroyed at the end of the third film when Neo made that deal with the Machine God and the Machine City, basically, that he would defeat Smith and the machine god would free all humans if he defeated Smith because Smith had become just as much of a problem for the machines as he had for the humans. But there are obviously other characters who play kind of like different versions of the same archetype in the movie. Like there's basically another version of Smith who looks different, for example, and other characters as well, like Morpheus, but he also looks different. And they don't really explain why. Neo and Trinity look the same, other than this kind of one line explanation, which is some like you look way younger to yourself than you do look in reality, and they show him an image of him in a mirror where he looks like he's at least in his 60s, whereas he looks like whatever uh, Keanu Reeves' age is in reality in the movie, like in his 50s or something. But I guess the guy is like balding with gray hair when it shows him in the future. But again, though, another one of the cool things, just in terms of nostalgia, is that the moment when Neo and Trinity are escaping on a bike, and Trinity is doing her awesome bike riding, except she's saving Neo this time. And, that's obviously a clear callback the to the Matrix Reloaded, when Trinity is escaping with the Keymaker and trying to prevent him by being killed by the Merovingian, and they're trying to capture the Keymaker so Neo can return to the source, which is where he has this conversation with the architect, of course, right? Now, another theme that is interesting that they flip on the head in, I think, a really interesting way in the movie, is the red pill, blue pill thing, right? So, take the red pill, the Messiah, Neo takes the red pill in the first movie, and it shows you the truth. That's what Morpheus, the new version of Morpheus, says in this movie too. The the pill shows you the truth, but it's interesting because Neo refuses to take the pill because he knows that in the sense of him designing the Matrix games, at least he knows that it's actually a false choice, because you're going to take the red pill if you're told that the reality that you're living is a lie, because even if you go back to your life, you would know that the life that you're living is a lie. And and no one would willingly take the blue pill, which is another interesting aspect of his character, because um, Neil Patrick Harris, or his therapist, is giving him blue pills, which is obvious. It's obvious the meaning behind that turns out to be that he's giving Neo blue pills to suppress the true nature of reality from him. So he's keeping him blue pilled to be able to lie about the true nature of reality and make him think that he's in the real world rather than the Matrix. And yeah, like I said, another interesting aspect of this is the way that they use mirrors in the Matrix Resurrections in comparison to what they did with them in the original movie. I guess particularly just the first one, because of course there's that iconic scene in the first movie in which Neo he's just taken the red pill, and they're basically trying to find his body in the real world, and then but in the Matrix they're hooking him up to all of this stuff, which is like antiquated technology at this point, right? Like dial up internet. So, and they explain at one point in the movie that they don't have to use phone booths anymore to exit the matrix and go back to the real world, and that you can travel through mirrors, which is really interesting because it furthers the Alice in Wonderland metaphor that we see especially emphasized in the first movie, right? And that's one of the other many themes that they're carrying over into this one. But one of my other problems, though, is that it's kind of like a clusterfuck. Like they just threw everything, all of the themes from the first three movies into this. And I like all of those themes, but it could have been done more effectively if they had spread that out more, since there are obviously going to be more movies anyway. But obviously, it's interesting because Neo is looking at his mirror, and when he's starting to question reality, he's wondering whether he's in the real world or whether he really is in the Matrix. And it's in a bathroom where there are mirrors, where this version of Morpheus gives him the red pill, blue pill choice. And it's the first of, I think, at least two times that Neo denies the even making the choice of whether he'll take the red pill or the blue pill. And Yeah, like there's some really cool stuff associated with that one scene where they have to exit the Matrix through the mirror, especially where people are like Morpheus and the new kind of version of Trinity, Bug, I think her name is, are jumping off of walls and shooting at the agents, which can do this zombie swarm mode now, which I think is kind of cool, kind of cheesy, but kind of cool too. But it doesn't look anywhere near as cool as like more iconic scenes like this in the first one, which is one of many in all three of the original films, especially the first one that have these truly amazing visuals. Like this one, of course, Neo dodging bullets and doing that backwards bend thing. Nowadays, movies just do the CG and just edit it in post production all the time, and they just do it on a green screen or a green screen studio or whatever. And to do this back in the year like 1999 or 98, I guess, when they were making it, they constructed this full circle of cameras to make the cameras go around completely in a circle and photograph it and then loop all of that together. They couldn't just do that with CG, and it looks better than anything in the Matrix Resurrections, I would say. Even though, like I said, I do like this movie more than a lot of the people who are criticizing it. I think it could have been a lot worse, but it definitely could have been better too. So anyway, like I said, Morpheus and Bugs are new characters. Well, Morpheus obviously is an old character, but like I said, in the Matrix Resurrections, Morpheus looks different, and Bugs is kind of like if we're looking at these characters as archetypes, which it kind of seems like Lana Wachowski is making one of the many themes in this movie that like Morpheus obviously is Morpheus, but he looks different. And also, for some reason, he starts off as an agent, but the agent has his own agency like that. But it's interesting because it's forwarding this crucial theme that I think is present in the movie, which is the deconstruction of binaries, like the postmodern deconstruction of binaries that happens particularly in the second two films of the original trilogies, The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Resurrections. The idea that this dichotomy between good and evil, Neo and Morpheus, and humans and machines is not a strict dichotomy, and they've ramped that up even more in this with some of the AIs and machines uniting with the humans in the fight against other machines, and some of the humans help the machines too, and some of the humans have become corrupted. And I think that's a really interesting theme that happens in this movie. So that's an interesting scene that Morpheus is in there too, where he's looking at that mirror because it forwards the theme of how even Morpheus is questioning his identity, and he, of course, is a program. So we have more of this theme of breaking down binaries and seeing that even agents can have agency and they can join the quote unquote good side in the war between humans and machines, which is a much more complicated war at this point for sure. And uh like this is a great scene too. Like of course one of the I just keep going back to these because I'm nostalgic. Um like a lot of the nostalgic stuff that the movie tries to do, it doesn't do as well as it could have done, like the famous lobby shootout scene in the first movie, of course, right? And I just wish they had spent more time on that aspect of it. But like I said, I like the themes a lot in it too. And like when the Neo rescues Morpheus with the minigun, I won't go through all of these way too many screenshots that I got of the scenes that I like, but there are many callbacks to the first movie and the original trilogy. Like this is another one, of course, that's in the Matrix Resurrections, which I think is interesting because it's obviously an homage to the same scene in the first movie, this sparring scene with Morpheus and Neo in the first movie. And in this one, it's basically the same type of thing. And this version of Morpheus is miming the exact same lines he said before, he's almost doing it in a mocking way, which is another thing that I think is interesting because I wonder if maybe Lana Wachowski was deliberately satirizing some of the messages in the original trilogy, at least, or the first one, because maybe she doesn't like the fact that fans seem to kind of miss the message in a way, perhaps because, as some of you know, I'm a die-hard defender of the Matrix sequels because I love the philosophical and spiritual messages, even though I definitely fully admit that the execution is worse and the first one is my favorite in terms of its execution. But anyway, in this scene, the it's a callback to the sparring scene from the kung fu sparring scene from the first Matrix movie. But then also they've ramped up Neo's powers in this, so he has like crazy Dragon Ball Z powers, which is pretty awesome, I have to say. Because in this sparring scene, he beats Morpheus by using his fucking Dragon Ball Z energy blast on him and blasts him like through the wall, which is way more crazy than what happens in the first movie. So yeah, I think that's really cool, and it's one of the many ways that they kind of picked up on things from the first movie or the first trilogy and ramped them up a bit. Some of the ways they did that, I definitely admit was cheesy, but that was one of many that I think was interesting. And I mentioned earlier that some of the characters even get corrupted, right? And of course, in the Matrix Resurrections, one of these characters is Niobe, who was in the Matrix Reloaded and the Matrix Resurrections, right? She does a lot of side missions to help Neo, and she was in, I think, oh yeah, she was in it. Her and Ghost were the main characters in that video game Enter the Matrix, which was really interesting and fun. But in the Matrix Resurrections, even though she was on Neo's side in the Matrix Reloaded and the Matrix Revolutions, in the Matrix Resurrections, because I think it's approximately 60 years in the future, they say, uh, Niobe is the only one ruling the new Zion, which I think is called Io at this point, and she rescues Neo from when Bug's ship finally unplugs Neo from the Matrix and takes him to Lo, which is the new Zion. And during that part, actually, I'll get to that. We get into more of how Morpheus has changed too, but I'll get into that. And also, they enter Zion in a different way. They enter like through the wall, like through a wall of reality, which is an interesting way because this is indicative of another way that they've actually started working with the machines in some of the ways. Like some of the Squiddies or the Sentinels have become their allies. But anyway, once they have brought Neo to Lo, Niobe imprisons him instead because she's become cynical about the war and she just wants to give in to the way things are because basically she's given up, which given the way things are is totally understandable, I think. And so another character that is, if you consider these characters to be archetypes, basically another version of of the same character we see is Neil Patrick Harris's character, as I said, who in this new version of the Matrix is basically the new version of the architect. He's controlling the Matrix, but he's also basically playing the role of psychiatrist or counselor to Neo to convince him that he's really Thomas Anderson and he's just a video game designer who created the Matrix. And Trinity is married to another woman. She has another family. She'll never be with you, and all this kind of bullshit, right? And it's really interesting because, like, given what happens at the end of the movie, where Neo and Trinity take away his power from him, basically. So he ends up being like he basically ends up being the main villain in the film rather than Agent Smith because this is another way that they break down the dichotomy. So of course in the even you could even say the first two Matrix films, the main villain was Smith, right? Neo had to stop Smith. And but at the end, it wasn't until the end of the Matrix Revolutions that Neo realized that and this is the strong spiritual message, which I don't think is as present in the Matrix Resurrections, but it is a little bit, and I like it, which is that Neo realizes that the only way he can truly achieve peace and truly defeat Smith is by uniting with him. So the only way that evil can be defeated and peace can be achieved is by good surrendering to evil and uniting with evil in order to achieve peace, because you have to sacrifice yourself. You have to sacrifice the good in order to destroy the evil, because they're binary opposites, but they're also necessary for each other's existence. Which is why I think this, like, Smith is interesting, but definitely not as good as Hugo Weaving in this, where this new actor who is that guy in that show Mindhunters, he plays a new version of Smith, who is Thomas Anderson's boss slash partner in his video game company where he created the Matrix video games. And but at what they do differently that I kind of like, even though again the execution is kind of cheesy in the Matrix Resurrections, is that at the like he does fight Neo, this new version of Smith, but at the end of the Matrix, he actually ends up helping Neo and helping him fight to allow Neo to free Trinity's mind so he can free her from the Matrix. Because it's interesting, because a lot of the mission in this is Neo trying to free Trinity from the Matrix once he is freed himself, because it turns out that the machines and the architect did go back on their deal, and they inserted them back into the Matrix after they quote unquote killed them, and they tried to sell them this new Matrix that they're in their false reality now, which I think is another interesting aspect of the plot and one of the interesting themes in the movie. So that's another thing that I like with that they did with that, in terms of the underlying meaning of the movie. And there are a few more interesting parallels between the other movies and this one as well. Um, oh, and similar to the two different versions of Agent Smith in the Matrix, and in comparison, that in comparison between Neo and Trinity is interesting too, because we also have the Merovingian for a bit in here, and in but the interesting thing about that is that we don't know for sure, because we're not told whether the Merovingians, because the Merovingian's appearance in this is clearly just an older version of his appearance in the Matrix Reloaded and Matrix Resurrections, right? So like we don't really know if he's like, is he the same program but jacked into this new version of the Matrix? If so, is he actually even older than he looks? Because Neo and Trinity did age, but not as much at the time that actually passed, because it's 60 years, but they only look however much older they look in reality, 20 years or so. So is he the same program and he got even older, or is he a new program, but this version of the Matrix has existed for 60 years and he's aged? And do programs age? Like his purpose in this movie, it's interesting, but I don't really see the point of it, and they don't explain enough for me to nerd out enough for it to seem consistent with the story, the way the story works in the original trilogy. Um, so yeah, I mentioned Neo's true appearance. So when he looks in that mirror, when they're trying to free him from the Matrix, we see his true appearance as a really old man, which is interesting. So his residual self-image is not the way he sees himself in reality, which makes sense. But in this case, he looks super old, but he also looks like a totally different person in a way. So, like Trinity in reality, the way she actually looks in this version of the Matrix is probably actually someone who looks a lot like Carrie Ann Moss, but is not actually her. So, but they don't show us what Carrie Ann Moss actually looks like in this version of the Matrix either. But it's just that's interesting how you look different to the point that you're a different person, but someone who looks very similar to you. Another thing that I thought was interesting in this movie that was kind of disappointing was that they didn't have the Oracle in it. And I think that maybe part of the reason that they do that seems like maybe like in this sort of postmodern sense of the deconstruction of binaries, maybe they're breaking down this like the sort of old ways where they have to have this counterbalancing system to the balancing system of the architect in the Matrix, and this is too like religious and spiritual, so they have to get away from that. So maybe that's why they didn't have that as much in terms of the themes of the movie. But I thought that would have been really cool, even if they had another new actor, because I don't know if that second actor who played the Oracle unfortunately died too, like the first one did, which is why they had to replace her in the second movie. But it could have like they could have gone a lot of in a lot of different and interesting directions in terms of what they could have done with the Oracle. But I mean, like I said, they already smashed way too many goddamn themes and characters and topics into the movie anyway. Even though, like I said, I really liked a lot of the way they executed some of the themes. So another character that is brought along from the original trilogy is Sati, and it's interesting because if you remember, this is tied to the main theme of breaking down and deconstructing binaries that the movie does, which is how exhibited by how in the I think it's in the second yeah in the second movie when at the no it's in the third movie, yeah, because Matrix at the end of Neo at the end of the second Matrix accidentally jacked himself into the Matrix using just his mind, and he's at the train station controlled by the Merovingian, and Sati, who's a program, her parents have negotiated a deal with the Merovingian for the train man to take Sati to a better place where she will be free. But then it's interesting because this next version of the Matrix, she's she's an adult woman now. So we don't know if this I guess she must have aged slowly like Neo did too, because she's obviously not 60 years old. So she must have aged slowly too. And it's revealed at one point that she was basically working the same building as Neo because she was checking up on him, and she always wanted him to be free, but she wanted him to make his own decision, which is interesting because she's all about choice. But one of the themes of this movie seems to be breaking down this illusion of choice, and that choice is an illusion. But then she also gets involved once he is freed in his mission to free Trinity, and she designs a plan to help Neo free Trinity, which is interesting because it's almost flipping the theme on its head a little bit, because it's almost like Trinity is one of the ones and Neo and Trinity are both the one because they're both required for each other. And I know some people don't think that the romance is as strong between them and it's a key aspect of the movies, but I think that it is in terms of the way that the way that it it attaches the meaning to love, and how the one, he's the Messiah, he's example the of his love for all of humanity, which is why he's the savior of the human race. And we see in the conversation with the architect in the second movie that Neo's relationship as the one with humanity is different from any other versions of the one in any other version of the Matrix, in that it is exhibited between uh, through his love for Trinity, his love for one woman. So their relationship uh, is basically exemplifying the hope of the entire human race. And they're really obviously ramping that up in this too, which I think is cool actually, because it has a lot of really interesting philosophical meaning, even though I'm not big on romance stuff. And like all the philosophy and science fiction stuff all mixed together is is what makes the movies awesome, right? But that's another interesting thing about the movie, I think, because one of the one of the main themes is that everything is a story. And I think that's really interesting because basically it's that reality is her own story. Niobe says at one point that Zion itself were they were living in their own version of the Matrix. And I think that's true. And it's really interesting because throughout the movie it kind of seems to be establishing that reality is the story that you tell yourself. We all have our own different stories of reality. There are some different, some similarities, but it's totally subjective. And what's the difference between the Matrix and reality is what you want it to be, which is why Neo and Trinity discovered together that because they are the ones, both of them basically, that they have the power to, as the architect, I think it was the architect who said at the end of the second movie, you can. No, no, it was Neo in the first movie who said that a man was born inside who could change the Matrix as he saw fit. And we see with when at the end of the Matrix Resurrections, when Neo and Trinity jump off of the building, it's their act of hope and faith, which is why a lot of this is about faith. And I'm an atheist, but I think this is a really powerful and awesome message in all four movies. Uh, that their love for each other is exemplified through faith. And when they jump off the building, Neo fails to fly, but Trinity is the one who flies. And so they save each other. And it's interesting because if you look at all four movies as a whole series, you see that they're always saving each other. She saves him, especially many times in the first movie. He saves her. They both save each other a bunch of times. This time he saved her by freeing her from the Matrix, and then she saved him in the Matrix. And then now at the end of the movie, we see them confront the architect in the form of Neil Patrick Harris, of course, and basically they're saying that they're going to change the Matrix as they see fit, which is interesting because instead of just freeing everyone from the Matrix, they're going to stay in the Matrix and make it the best possible reality that they can make it and give people as much freedom as they possibly can and stop fighting this war of the binary opposites of good and evil and humans and machines. And you can exist in both realities knowing that they're both existing, and we don't have to have a war, which I think is interesting. That's another way that I think it's interesting, how they break down binaries, like how it shows with Neo's relationship with Smith in this movie, that Smith was never the true villain. The true villain was the Matrix itself, and this false dichotomy of good and evil and humans and machines, and you should work together to try to make the world a better place instead, which is why I like it, because it's a super strong hippie message. So yeah. Anyway, I think I've rambled on quite enough. So that's a lot of the interesting and important themes I saw in there, and just dynamics in terms of what happens with the characters and the themes in comparison to the other movies, and in terms of the execution of the shots visually in comparison to the other movies. So yeah, overall, I think it's a really great movie. I know a lot of people hate it, and I would say, in terms of ranking it in comparison to the other movies, the first one is still, like, it's always been my favorite, but I really am a diehard defender of the second and third movies. I really do think those are really awesome too. But I do think that four is my least favorite, but I still think it's a really good movie. Like I said, it could have been better for sure, but it also could have been a lot worse. So I don't know. I'd give the first Matrix movie 10 out of 10, the second and third movies both 9 out of 10, and I'd give this one, I think I'd give it like a 7 out of 10. which is a really good movie in my world. So yeah. Anyway, check out the movie. It's really awesome and interesting, and it does the bare minimum of what it should have accomplished, which is causing people to debate and think and talk about it. So that's what a Matrix movie should do, make you think about philosophical concepts, whether you like them or not. All right, so yeah, thanks everyone for watching my kind of review and reaction of The Matrix Resurrections. And of course, watch all of the other movies and check out my video I made a long time ago about how the Matrix relates to Spinoza's concept of monism in terms of his monistic God, whereas God is basically just reality as a whole. It's just the universe, and that relates to what the Matrix itself is in connection with the real world and the world and how they represent the mind, the body, and the spirit. If you look at them from a spiritual or philosophical perspective, and also really looking forward to this on Friday. I'm going to be talking with Jared Bauer from Wisecrack, who I've talked with a few times before, of course. And we're going to talk about our thoughts about the movie. I know he didn't like it as much as I did, but there's definitely a lot of interesting stuff going on there for sure. And I'm sure it'll be a fascinating discussion. And also tomorrow, I'm going to do a podcast with my Orthodox Christian friend Shane Kennedy and fellow psychonaut friend Parker, both of whom I've talked with at least a couple times before. We're going to talk about psychedelics as a religious experience, because I think they are kind of religious experience, even though I'm not religious myself. And I think they're an example of how you can have a religious experience without any need at all whatsoever for any sort of religious institution or agreeing with anyone about any religious beliefs, or even agreeing that there's actually something magical happening, or that it's anything more than just electrical signals in your brain. Even though I actually am open to that possibility, I don't think that's what's actually happening. But we're also going to talk about that in relation to consciousness, religious institutions, as I said, um, from a postmodern perspective, from my end of it anyway, and Jordan Peterson, of course, because both Parker and Shane are huge Jordan Peterson fans, and we're going to relate that to atheism too, and and Jordan Peterson's belief in God, and how that relates to psychedelics, and my criticism of what Jordan Peterson has to say about atheism. So that'll be a really interesting discussion too. So look forward to that as well. And yeah, thanks to everyone for watching. Click that like button, subscribe, click the bell to be notified when I come out with new videos. We're going to be talking about an Arcanum Unbounded story by Brandon Sanderson, who's the fantasy author of Mistborn and Stormlight Archive, and is the co-producer on the new Wheel of Time show, or some sort of producer, creative consultant, maybe, I think. And I'm going to talk about that with my friends Dusty and Tristram, who I do nerd deep dives with. And yeah, thanks especially to those of you who go and check out my Patreon. The link is in the description as always. And like I always say, I love you all, keeping a tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness of the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all, and groove is in the heart. And watch all the Matrix movies, they're awesome. And tell me all your hot takes in the comments. I'm very excited to talk about them. All right. Thanks again, everyone, and adios until next time.